In May 2022, my friend Shane was shot 16 times in broad daylight. It was caught on CCTV. They got the car, make, and model, and the license plate. With that type of careless criminal behavior, we figured it'd be an open and shut case, but it's been nearly 3 years and no arrests have been made, no justice has been served. And when his brother started asking questions, what he discovered is going to shock you, because it turns out that the people who killed him weren't hiding, because they didn't have to, because they were protected, and not by the streets, but by the federal government. Now, most people think that the streets are like the jungle, a dog-eat-dog type world where survival of the thuggiest type place, where whoever's willing to risk their freedom, those are the people who get to live free. But it's not really like that a lot of the times. Sometimes it's more like a zoo. And in that zoo, the danger doesn't come from other animals. Instead, it's when the zookeepers decide to let the apex predators loose and unchecked because they've decided that it's easier to control wild animals with even wilder ones. Even if that means that some innocent docile animals gotta get eaten too. On May 5th, 2022, Shane Strayder was parked in a relatively safe part of Pittsburgh, doing nothing illegal, when a car pulled up next to him and fired 16 shots into his vehicle and sped away. First responders pronounced him dead at the scene, but seeing as how the shooting happened between the school and the National Aviary, CCTV footage captured the entire thing, including the license plate of the murderer's vehicle. Now, I didn't know Shane that well, but we had mutual friends, and I earned his respect after he watched me in an amateur boxing match between he and his brother where I won decisively. And I still talk to his sister on a regular basis. They're good people. They weren't from the projects, but they all grew up in an equally dangerous part of town and faced a lot of problems I talk about in my other videos on this channel about my life in the projects. I also talk about my upbringing in depth in my new book, Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business, Boxing, and the Art of Life. You can read a free chapter and pre-order at the link in the pinned comment. But the Strayder family were a lot like me in that none of them became products of their environment, and instead they all went on to become hardworking, law-abiding citizens. Shane was a city bus driver. His brother Aaron is a fireman, and he invested so much of his time and energy into coaching his kids and other neighborhood kids in football that both of his sons are top Division I players. And his sister works out of a research lab in DC in biology. I mention all of this to say that while they were from the streets, they were not of the streets. And that's important for the next part. 2 weeks after the murder of his brother, Aaron gave an interview to our local news station where he said his brother was there to get a pair of shoes from his girlfriend who worked as a custodian at Allegheny Traditional Academy. He then went on to say, and this is a direct quote, "This could have been anybody in that car at that time, outside of the school, down the street from the aviary, around the corner from the Children's Museum, in the business district. My first initial reaction was, why would this happen? Who would do this to my brother? But when I found out that it's possibly a mistaken identity, it crushed me. It absolutely crushed me." Around this time, Aaron posted a lengthy Facebook message about how the police knew who did it, but they were being kept from making an arrest because it would jeopardize a federal investigation. He made a few Instagram story posts with the same claims, and we started talking. I told him about the essay I wrote that's the original motivation for this video. I'll drop the link to that in the description. And he responded, "I think that's what's going on in my brother's case." Of course, the police didn't tell him all of this information explicitly. He's a street dude with street connections, and from my understanding, he was able to find out just enough to know that his brother's assailants almost certainly operate with protection because an agency with greater power needs them to keep doing what they do so they can get what they want. Word around the ghetto campfires that the shooters were involved in high-level drug distribution. And the feds didn't want to put them away because they needed them for their case. Apparently, Shane was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and people who have a literal get-out-of-jail-free card were the shooters because they're informants. And the agencies protecting them decided their intel was more important than justice or Shane's life. At first, I thought maybe it was just another cold case, to be honest. But the police had all the evidence, and we know this because the CCTV footage was shown on the nightly news, so they likely had even more information that wasn't disclosed to the public. So I got curious and looked into how murder cases like this are typically handled. In 2023, the clearance rate for murder by arrest in the United States was 57.8%, meaning that 57.8% of murders were cleared through either the arrest of the offenders or through special circumstances like the offender's death during the arrest process. I imagine that once removed in the game killings where there is likely to be a report of the murder, but the person lives a life where snitching is a death sentence, and homeless homicides, which, by the way, are growing at an alarming rate, with 15 of the largest American cities reporting over 1,000 homeless homicide victims since 2010, then the clearance rate jumps even higher, especially when innocent victims with children are involved, like Shane was. Still, 57.8% might not sound that impressive to you. So to put that number into perspective, think of it this way. The crime with the next highest clearance rate is aggravated assault at 41.6%. Or to put it another way, you're more likely to get justice if you're killed than if you get your ass kicked and you live to actually see who did it. The higher clearance rate of murder is likely due to the advances in technology, including the fact that CCTV is everywhere. For less than $1,000, you can get a Ring camera set up on your porch to try and deter people from snatching your Amazon packages. That's likely how the police have enough information to know who pulled the triggers. At this point, it's not that the police really don't know who did it, it's that they can't do anything about it. And they aren't telling his brother who did it because remember, he ain't of the streets, but he's from them and he still has those connections, and you can't blame a guy for doing something like that when his brother is gunned down. Now, I've warned people about the danger of keeping a cool head in my video, Real Tough Guys Don't Fight. What they do instead might save your life. I'll put a link to that in the description. It can make a huge difference, sometimes saving your life in situations where you might not even know the danger that you're in. After all, you never know if you're dealing with someone who has a gun, doesn't care about going to jail, is mobbed up, or in a street gang, or is protected by the law from the law. It's not difficult to imagine encountering someone in the first three scenarios, especially with how easy it is to acquire firearms in the United States. We also know that many people are one bad day away from doing something irreversible and destructive that involves firearms and a random disregard for human life. And while you may not personally know any members of organized crime, it's real, whether it's something as loosely organized as the Bloods and Crips street gangs or structured like Hell's Angels or the Mexican Mafia. And if you cross one of their members, it's not so much that they're protected from the law, is that they'll do whatever it takes to deal with the disrespect because of the expectations and protection of their group. Organized crime, though, by definition is illegal, but its influence is so vast that many members enjoy de facto immunity. Even in cases dealing with low-level street gangs, the threat of intimidation can be surprisingly potent, causing witnesses to forget crucial details of an incident. That's why I always suggest being polite to everyone you encounter. You never know who doesn't care about ending up behind bars or has the ability to keep themselves from ending up there. And while the latter really shouldn't be a possibility, it's the reality of the world we're in. I don't know how above water this is, but it's not unprecedented. A few years ago, a story broke about this practice. In a 2003 LA Times article, aptly titled Informants May Get a Pass for Murder, Joseph O'Brien, a former FBI informant coordinator in New York City, said, "The Bureau has to encourage these guys to be themselves and do what they do. If they stop just because they're working with the FBI, someone's going to know something's up. If anything, I'd want them to become more active." In other words, some people can kill you without facing legal consequences, and they know it. In fact, they may be more emboldened to do so because they need to maintain a cover and not have anyone think they're a snitch. If for some reason the name Derek Chauvin doesn't ring a bell, he's the officer who was found guilty of killing George Floyd. He was stabbed while serving his time in prison by John Tuskak, who had previously worked as an FBI informant. Tuskak was in prison after being found guilty of racketeering and conspiring to kill a gang rival member. Before that, he worked as an FBI informant against them for the Mexican Mafia. While being sentenced in 2001, Tuskak admitted that he carried out crimes while working undercover as an informant to the FBI. He said, "I didn't commit those crimes for kicks. I did them because I had to if I wanted to stay alive. I told that to the FBI agents and they just said, do what you have to do." And while the practice of letting confidential informants get away with crime, even murder, is morally reprehensible, ethically dubious, and a complete betrayal of the trust we place in law enforcement to protect us, their actions kind of make sense. It's just unfortunate when people not in the game become collateral damage, but the alphabet boys don't really care about that. Maybe to them, it's a case of the lesser of two evils. But that sits about as right with me as the CIA selling cocaine to fund a foreign war. And a lot of times the government doesn't even pick their confidential informants right. I love true crime shows, especially 48 Hours. In one episode, I learned about a guy, Scott Lee Kimball, who was a serial killer who tricked the FBI into thinking he had important information on crimes. Most of it was made up, but it protected him from prosecution and investigation into some of his other crimes that would have kept him off the streets. Kimball isn't the only serial killer the FBI enabled by labeling them as confidential informants. Kenyell Brown of Detroit was serving for multiple drug sentences and violent offenses, a life sentence actually, but a Supreme Court ruling got that reduced to just 21 years. But he only served 14 months after the ATF and the FBI got him released to be an informant. While out on parole, he violated that parole many times with DUIs and drug possession, but each time the agency got him out of jail. Eventually, he went on an armed robbery spree that resulted in the deaths of 6 innocent people. Now, this time, the agency did try to rein him in, but before that could happen, he offed himself, and the news report said that if this guy wasn't allowed to be on the street as an informant, he'd still be behind bars, and everyone would be safe and alive. And they're exactly right. And it's not just informants or gang members with federal protection. Sometimes the person who can kill you and walk free wears a badge and cashes a government paycheck. Did you know that between 2013 and 2022, over 1,200 people were killed by police officers each year in the United States? That's more than 12,000 deaths in a decade, and yet in that same time frame, fewer than 150 officers faced murder or manslaughter charges, let alone convictions. That's just over 1%. And let me repeat that for you another way to hammer home how significant that number is. 99 out of 100 times, nothing happens. And this isn't always about a shootout or a split-second decision. There are body cam videos, surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and still the vast majority of these officers never see the inside of a courtroom, let alone a prison. Some departments have internal affairs divisions that bear reports. Internal affairs are the people who police the police. And I just found this out, that you know that the internal affairs is just made up of other officers. The police are trying to police the police and police their own, but I'd imagine there's quite a conflict of interest there. And some police have police unions, so powerful that they can reinstate officers with long records of misconduct, like they're rehiring a barista at Starbucks. When Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd, it was caught on camera and seen by the world. But he had 17 prior misconduct complaints on record, and he was still on patrol. And he's not alone. Michael Rosfeld, the officer who fatally shot Antoine Rose II here in Pittsburgh, my hometown, had a disciplinary history of his own. Before he was hired by the East Pittsburgh Police Department, he was placed on administrative leave by the University of Pittsburgh Police for mishandling an arrest, an incident that involved the son of a university official. He resigned before the internal investigation could conclude, so the university failed to document him properly. As a result, when the East Pittsburgh police hired him, they had no idea what kind of dude they were bringing on. And just 3 hours after being sworn in, Rosfeld pulled the trigger, and Antoine Rose, a 17-year-old unarmed teen, was dead. Despite clear video evidence and public outcry, Rosfeld was acquitted of all charges after less than 4 hours of jury deliberation. From street informants to sworn officers, the badge, real or metaphorical, becomes a shield. Not just from bullets, but from consequences. And don't get it twisted here. I'm not saying that every cop is dirty. I've had my run-ins with the law because I've broken the law. And some officers treated me with respect, even when I didn't deserve it. But let's be real here for a minute. When you have the power to take a life and walk away untouched, that power needs to be checked. And right now, we don't have enough checking going on. I think defund the police is a really stupid idea, and that being a cop is a difficult and dangerous job that demands respect. But I also believe that if you have that much power, then it must be wielded responsibly. And for that to happen, the things I'm describing in this video cannot happen. But when they do, the punishment should be swift and severe. Because when a law enforcement officer breaks the law, either actively or by turning a blind eye, the damage is far greater than when a regular civilian messes up. Right now, the truth is, if you're wearing the uniform, carrying the badge, and your department is behind you, you can get away with just about anything. This is the major reason why I tell young black men to be polite to the cops. And if you feel like your rights were violated, fight them in court. Because if you decide you're going to fight that battle at the traffic stop, you're either going to lose your life or your freedom, and they'll lose nothing. And that makes it hard to know who the real threats are. It's not just the guy with a clear, long rap sheet. It's the one with the clean uniform and a dirty record. The one who knows the system because he is the system. No matter how badass you think you are, there is not only someone worse, but there are people who are bad and will never have to face the consequences for their evil. As dangerous as informants can be, there's another class of people again tout to the government who can act reckless, take lives, and even do worse, and they know it. Shane wasn't in the game. He wasn't a snitch. He wasn't running from anything. But he died at the hands of people the government were protecting. That's when I learned the ugly truth. The streets are dangerous, but the feds, sometimes, they're worse. To learn more about the drug trade from someone who had a front row seat to all of the wild violence and depravity it brought with it, check out this video here, where I talk about my experiences growing up to, and I'm saying it this way because the YouTube censors seem to be particularly sensitive about these words, substance users and substance dealers.